Boston Globe column about cancel culture. And we wanted to talk about it because, of course, this week, former SNL hire Shane Gillis, Justin Trudeau, both have been talked about under this umbrella of cancel culture. Renee Graham wrote, I'm old enough to recall when cancel culture was better known as consequences. Saying cancel culture generally means boycotting or ghosting someone who has said or done something racist, sexist, anti-LGBTQ, or otherwise deeply objectionable. And when such people face repercussions, they are the first to decry a world overrun by humorless, unforgiving, politically correct snowflakes on yet another witch hunt. And then taking it back to Shane Gillis, there were a lot of comedians that had a lot to say. A lot of people in general, though. Even Andrew Yang kind of stepped in and was like defending him a little bit. This is what Bill Burr said. Did they go back and try and look back at good things the person might have done, or are they just looking for the bad stuff? For the record, of course, she points out, Gillis made his most recent racist comments way back in 2018, and he said them on a podcast, so they weren't hard to find. You didn't have to do much digging. And also, I think this is important too, before I open it up, right? So there is something else that I think is so important. The idea that the culture was different a long time ago, that society was okay with it back then. And I think that depends on what you consider, who you consider to be a part of society.
Yeah.
So Graham wrote about dealing with a racist incident in her newsroom a while back, and a colleague mentioned a time when you could just say anything. And she wrote, he didn't realize that those were miserable decades for women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community. You were expected to stay silent while your race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual identity was dragged to filth in front of your face. What was once okay for him was never okay for the rest of us. And there's more, but I know we're running out of time here.
So what does it happen to people? People have changed. Suddenly they're so hypersensitive and offended by everything. You know what the difference was? People in these work settings or school settings or any of that stuff. I grew up as a black kid in the middle of the country, middle of St. Louis, and plenty of things were said and done around me.
You mean a black person is from Middle America?
It's crazy how it works, right? Because that's where the hardworking grit white folks are from. So whenever that happens, it's survival technique. So we're like, oh man, I remember my friend back in the day, I called them N-words all the time, and I just joked about how lazy Latinos are and all this stuff, and they're cool with it. They were never cool with it.
Right, absolutely. We weren't cool with you switching up our names. We weren't cool with you throwing our lunch into a trash can before we ate it. We weren't cool with that.
Yeah, so as it happened, you go through all these problems, and people constantly are talking about how everything was awesome then. But you know what? That was to get along, because the people who spoke out against it were that happened. Those people were murdered many times, and then outside of that, once we have this world where we can speak on it more, and now that's why we're fighting over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, because man, I don't want to hear from these people. These are people that you were able to silence back in the day because they didn't have as many avenues to actually speak out and do what they wanted to do. You just like the good old days of silencing the folks that you didn't consider were real people. That's just the way we've always been.
And really just marginalized communities didn't have the same platforms, the same voice.
And now they're coming out and speaking, and now they're angry. They're so against me and everything I want to say. Hey, if you understand what your wrongs were, maybe you were going with the flow, cool. I don't mind when people aren't willing to accept that. But if you said, yeah, back in 1987 when I said those horrible things about gay folks, I totally missed the ball, and I apologize, and I've learned from it, and I've done this, and that to undo what I did. We talked about something earlier. You go through levels of things to do things the wrong way. Go through that same amount of effort to do things the right way. You put a lot of energy into being a hateful person.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and the other point is that who got to say anything? Like you brilliantly were talking about Jayar, that it was mostly white cis men, right? And what their problem is that the mic is getting passed to us. And it's actually not that we're empowered with the mic getting passed to us, but you're also hiding the fact that we're the ones, if we say anything, are being held accountable. So as an example, tenured faculty who've tweeted, mostly tenured faculty who are people of color, being critical of a war, being critical of warmongers and imperialist governments, they are the ones who've been fired from tenured jobs. And so not only I'm sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, but we still are not protected when we speak out. And again, the good old days, this is all MAGA. This is MAGA talk, and like I said, it's liberal MAGA. Because we'd like to think that saying racist stuff is what qualifies you for MAGA. It's all these, what people would call microaggressions. I don't call them microaggressions. I would say they're very loud to people of color because
I use the word microaggressions a lot, but they all feel like the N-word. Like, you know what I mean? They do. Like, it all does. And it comes from your friends. It comes from people around you.
And Cap was,
hate mongers, yeah.
And Cap was canceled,
right? That was another point that she had in here, that like there may be something you could consider cancel culture, but you're not talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, we have to move on from that.
All right. It's been a day. Friday.
It's hot in here now.
It is hot in here. I like that Asher found this story and that we got to have a conversation about cancel culture. There are a bunch of different names for people just accepting, like, people, there are being consequences for your actions and nobody's going to jail.
Right.
What happens is a breakdown of people not liking you because of what you did or what you do. And
figure yourself out.
Yeah.
Make yourself a better person.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.